Good morning, everyone. It's glorious to be with you this morning, Tuesday of Holy Week, to celebrate our Chrism Mass. First of all, I want to express on my own behalf, on behalf of the Catholic community, our thanks to our bishops and to our priests for their ministry, for their generous embracing of their vocation in the service of God's people. We're very pleased that in addition to our auxiliary bishops, Bishop McNaughton is with us. Bishop McNaughton is a Maryknoll father who was a missionary for many years in Korea and lives in the diocese, and it's always a joy to have him accompany us on important occasions like this. If someone asked what the Chrism Mass means for us, we might say that it's a time when we gather for the annual oil change and tune-up. The oils are the tools that we use in our ministry, but just as important is our own tune-up as we gather as a presbyterate to recommit ourselves to follow Christ and to shepherd his people. These oils will be used for about 20,000 baptisms, 15,000 confirmations, more than 100,000 anointings, 9 ordinations. And it is our bishops and priests, and in some cases our deacons, who will administer these sacraments. Your service, your generosity, your holiness is what brings the sacraments to our people and what makes the sacraments available. Your preaching and your witness of a priestly life is what makes the sacraments credible and meaningful to our people. The role of the priest is crucial, even for the priesthood itself. Every one of us priests here present can say that we were helped in discovering our priestly vocation because of the witness, the friendship, the advice that each of us experienced in a priest whom we knew and whose ministry touched our lives. Now it's our turn to cultivate vocations for the future. If we truly love our people, we will want them to have the blessings of the Catholic priesthood. In the first reading, the prophet Isaiah says today, "You yourselves shall be named priests of the Lord. Your descendants shall be renowned among the nations." Your priestly ministry will produce other ministers, other priests, who will serve the next generation of Catholics, and their vocations will inspire the next generation. The way that we express our thanks for our faith and for our vocations is to pass these gifts on. Pope Benedict said that faith is spread not by proselytizing, but by attraction. I believe the same is true of vocations. We felt a love for the priesthood because we saw the vocation embodied in a pastor, a curate, a teacher, a missionary. As a young man, we were not attracted because of great retirement benefits or insurance policies that provided hair transplants, cosmetic surgery, and new dentures. No, we were attracted by the idealism and the generosity of men who were good shepherds, who loved Christ and loved the people that they served. A few years ago, I was amused by the stark contrast between 2 vocation advertisements for the Jesuits, one in English and one in Spanish. The English one appeared on the back of America magazine. There was a photo of a young Tom Brady clone in Brooks Brothers clothes, perfectly appointed state-of-the-art classroom. And if you were interested, you could contact the vocation director at the number provided. The other advertisement was in a secular publication, El Nuevo Dia. It also depicted a Jesuit, but not in an ivory tower academic setting. It showed a young Jesuit lashed to a cross, upside down, being hurled over Iguazu waterfalls on the border between Paraguay and Brazil. The ad featured in bold letters, "Quieres ser Jesuita?" The picture came from the film The Mission. I found it much more beguiling than the America ad. I recall that when I entered the seminary, I was a nerdy kid, but I wanted to be a spiritual Rambo in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. Idealism and sacrifice is what attracts young men. Recently, the Jesuit magazines published an interview with the Holy Father. In that interview with Father Antonio Spadaro, they asked Pope Francis why he became a priest, why he became a Jesuit. The Holy Father shared with him that he was attracted by three things: their missionary spirit, their community, and their discipline. These are not necessarily Ignatian traits, although the young Jorge Bergoglio saw them incarnate in the Jesuits of his native Buenos Aires. I thought it might be interesting to reflect on these three characteristics in our lives as priests of the Archdiocese of Boston. Pope Francis was attracted by the missionary spirit and joined the Society of Jesus with a dream of becoming a missionary in Japan, like Francis Xavier or Pedro Arrupe. But his health was not good enough, and so Jorge Bergoglio remained in Argentina and discovered the need to be a missionary there. In Evangelii Gaudium, the Pope writes, "I dream of a missionary option. That is, a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the Church's customs, way of doing things, times and schedules, language and structure can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation." The Holy Father goes on to speak about pastoral conversion. He says the renewal of structures demanded by pastoral conversion can only be understood in this light, as part of an effort to make them more mission-oriented, to make ordinary pastoral activity on every level more inclusive and open to inspire in pastoral workers a constant desire to go forth, and in this way to elicit a positive response from all those whom Jesus summons to friendship with himself. Here in the Archdiocese, disciples in mission and the emphasis on evangelization is our own dream of a missionary option. We all realize that business as usual is not going to do it. We must be a missionary church here in the Bay State. The Holy Father states that the parish is not an outdated institution precisely because it possesses great flexibility. It can assume quite different contours depending on the openness and the missionary creativity of the pastor and the community. He warns against allowing a parish to become a useless structure out of touch with the people or a self-absorbed group made up of a chosen few. He calls on us to renew and review our parishes, to bring them near to people, to make them environments of living communion and participation, and make them completely mission-oriented. The Holy Father urges us to say no to pessimism. One of the more serious temptations which stifles boldness and zeal is a defeatism which turns into querulous and disillusioned pessimist, and as the Holy Father says, sourpusses. I'll bet that's the first time that expression was used in a papal document. The Holy Father reminds us nobody can go to battle unless he's fully convinced of the victory beforehand. If we start without confidence, we've already lost half the battle and we bury our talents. In the midst of the pastoral problems we face, our faith is challenged to discern how wine can come from water and how wheat grows amidst the weeds. I'm convinced that if we embrace this missionary option, our parishes will see more people responding to priestly vocations as well as to a life of Christian marriage. A missionary option will produce missionary disciples. The second quality the Pope mentions is community. The Holy Father is not referring to some Epicurean group of similar individuals who come together for camaraderie and convenience. The community we need is one of brothers who come together around Christ and share his vision, a community that is for the mission of Christ. I never tire of encouraging our priests to join or form priestly support groups where men can come together to pray, to reflect on their vocations, and to share each other's lives as they work together to bring Christ to his people. The Holy Father in Evangelii Gaudium reminds us that the Christian ideal will always be a summons to overcome suspicion, habitual mistrust, fear of losing our privacy, all of the defensive attitudes that the world imposes on us. The gospel tells us constantly to run the risk of a face-to-face encounter with others, with their physical presence that challenges us, with their pain and their pleas, with their joy which infects us in our close and continuous interaction. True faith in the incarnate Son of God is inseparable from self-giving, from membership in the community, from service, from reconciliation with others. I was very happy that Bishop Hennessy invited Father Ron Knott to give this year's clergy retreat. I guess the acupuncture Reiki master was not available, and so Father Knott was there. Father Knott always talks about intentional presbyterate with a corporate sense of priestly identity and mission. He's always reminding us that we are not private practitioners. In the ordination rite, every priest present joins the bishop in imposing hands on the ordinand and then gather around the bishop as he prays the consecratory prayer. By doing so, we participate in welcoming and celebrating the arrival of a new member into our intimate sacramental brotherhood. The Chrism Mass replicates some of this same symbolism, as together we bless these oils we will use for our sacramental ministry that we share with one another. The Lord is calling us to be a family gathering, not a house divided. We are diverse in our outlooks, ethnic backgrounds, ages, experience, spirituality, but we are all priests of the same presbyterate, sharing in the responsibility not only of our individual parish, but also of the entire archdiocese. In the chapter on the temptation faced by pastoral workers, the Holy Father pleads with us to say no to warring among ourselves. We need to give the witness of authentically fraternal and reconciled communities, which will help people feel attracted to the church. In the early church, the pagans marveled at the unity and fraternity in the church. See how they love one another was the mantra. The Holy Father says, "It always pains me greatly to discover how some Christian communities and even consecrated persons can tolerate different forms of enmity, division, calumny, defamation, vendetta, jealousy, and the desire to impose certain ideas at all cost, even to persecutions that appear as veritable witch hunts." Our challenge is to bear witness to a constantly new way of living together in fidelity to the gospel. It is fraternal love, capable of seeing the grandeur of our neighbor, of finding God in every human being, of tolerating the nuisances of life in common by clinging to the love of God, of opening the heart to divine love and seeking the happiness of others just as our Heavenly Father does. The third quality that attracted the young Jorge Bergoglio to his vocation was the discipline that he saw in the lives of the Jesuit priests in Buenos Aires. He especially admired their use of time. Discipline is not easy. In some ways, it gets harder as you grow older, but it's not less important. Certainly, one of the greatest disciplines, as the young Bergoglio wisely perceived, is our use of time. I never tire of urging my priest to develop a rule of life that will help assure a certain discipline in one's life and to guarantee the time needed to cultivate a real friendship with the Lord in prayer. Sometimes we deceive ourselves into believing that financial resources, pastoral techniques, professional trainings, and great organization is the key to success. All of those things can help, but true success depends on our own faith life and our vocation as priest and friend of Jesus Christ. As Holy Father says, the best incentive for sharing the gospel comes from contemplating it with love, lingering over its pages, and reading it with the heart. If we approach it in this way, its beauty will amaze and constantly excite us. But if this is to come about, we need to recover a contemplative spirit which can help us to realize ever anew that we have been entrusted with a treasure which makes us more human and helps us to lead a new life. There is nothing more precious which we can give to others. Prayer, spiritual reading, meditation must be a part of our daily routine. There are moments in our ministry that are difficult. I call them the Simon the Cyrenian moments. Simon was walking down the street, minding his own business, when those Romans snatched him and forced him to help Jesus carry the cross. I am sure that he was angry, upset, embarrassed, and frustrated. Being part of a public execution is not exactly part of everyone's bucket list. I'm sure he must have felt that it was the worst day of his life. The New Testament tells us very little about Simon the Cyrenian. We only know that he was African and that he had two sons, Alexander and Rufus. Some scholars have identified these sons with two men who were later leaders in the Christian community. I like to think that Simon's experience of carrying the cross is what led to his conversion and the conversion of his entire family. What began as the worst day of his life was really the best day, something he came to realize only much later. Yes, we all have Simon of Cyrenian moments in our ministry. Those are the difficult things we'd rather not do, but we have no escape. You've all heard the story how one Sunday morning a mother went up to wake her son to tell him it was time to get ready for church. To which he replied, "I'm not going." "Why not?" she asked. "I'll give you 2 good reasons, Mom." He said, "They don't like me, and I don't like them." His mother replied, "Billy, I'll give you 2 good reasons why you should go to church. You're 59 years old, and you're the pastor." We all have moments when we could say, "I'd rather be having a root canal." Yes, we all have Simon Cyrenian moments. But we do what we'd rather not do, we do. Perhaps because of human respect, fear of criticism, a despotic bishop, Irish guilt, powerful motivators. All of us have things we have to do that we dread. And you know what? Those worst days of our life are probably the most important things that we can do as priests. In my own ministry, I know that that is the case. During Lent, I love to pray the stations, and I often linger on the contrast between the 5th and the 6th station. In the 5th station, the Cyrenian is being forced to carry the cross. Inside, he's whining, feeling sorry for himself, and he can't wait for this to end. In the 6th station, Veronica overcomes all human respect, regard for her personal security or her reputation. She forces her way through the crowd that is always pushing us away from Christ. She only wants to provide the slightest service to comfort Christ, to be present to him, to wipe his bloodied face. It is courage and generosity that puts the needs of others first. This legendary woman represents all those disciples who boldly overcome the fear of the cross in order to be a sign of God's mercy to those who are suffering and those who seem to be beyond help. How do we move from being the character in the 5th station who's forced to do good to becoming like the one in the 6th station who does the right thing boldly and enthusiastically? That's the discipline that the young Jorge Bergoglio saw in the priests and religious he admired and who inspired him in his vocation. It's the kind of discipline that makes time and space for God in our daily life. It's the discipline that allows us to overcome our fear of the cross. Fear of the cross is what causes mediocrity. Love casts out that fear and allows us to face Calvary. It's not easy. Of the first priests, only the youngest one stood by the cross. He was terrified, but his love allowed him to overcome all fear and to stand at the foot of the cross. This is the discipline we need in our ministry, especially in our service of the sick and the poor and the suffering. The Holy Father challenges us to see Lazarus covered with sores on our doorstep. The Holy Father says our preferential love for the poor must translate into pastoral care for the suffering. We must look for ways to bring the Word of God and sacraments to them. It requires great discipline to be able to respond to the demands on our time and the many challenges of ministry. Our task is to allow the world to glimpse the love and mercy of the Good Shepherd, who's always seeking the lost sheep, not to condemn, but to console. Like the Greeks in the Gospel who wanted to see Jesus, our people want to glimpse Jesus in us, in our kindness, our mercy, our loving response to their pain and suffering. We often find ourselves where Simon the Cyrenian was, Only a person with discipline in their life will have the freedom to respond. It's the discipline that we will attain only by having a personal rule of life that provides for prayer, spiritual reading, confession, and priestly fraternity. The joy of the gospel that can make our ministry an expression of that joy requires apostolic zeal, priestly fraternity, and discipline, those same three things that attracted the young Jorge Bergoglio. At the same time, these qualities will inspire other young men to respond to the call to a vocation without having to throw Father Dan Hennessy over Niagara Falls on a cross. I never use props for my homily. Father Kevin O'Leary in his children's masses uses them with great skills. Recently, I was at Holy Name Church for a very moving ceremony and a funeral mass of one of the firemen who died in the tragic fire a couple of weeks ago. When Cardinal William O'Connell was building Holy Name Church, he included many beautiful features from his titular church in Rome of San Clemente. I featured the beautiful mosaic over the altar in my blog. It's a replica of the mosaic in that historic San Clemente church in Rome that has been a cardinalatial church for over 1,000 years. Subsequently, Fran Hawk sent me a copy of the cross as depicted in the mosaic. It's very unusual for the cross that appears in the apse as a tree of life, and at the foot of the cross a deer is drinking, and nearby there's a dead snake. But on the cross there are a series of birds. I was going to consult with Bishop John Bowles, an amateur ornithologist, but I decided to consult with the ancient and renowned theological authority, Wikipedia, and discovered that the San Clemente cross with the 12 doves represents the 12 apostles, poised to fly to the ends of the earth to announce Christ's victory. I thought about that. It occurred to me that on Good Friday there were not 12 doves on that cross. There was only one young priest nervously accompanying our Blessed Lady. The cross reminds us that the very apostles who fled from the cross into the witness protection program at the Senegal Safe House later returned to embrace the cross after Pentecost. Christ always gives us another chance to overcome our fear of the cross. The irony is, all the apostles died as martyrs except the one who actually was on Calvary. If we do not have missionary zeal in our ministry, if we're not striving to form a communion with our fellow priests in an intentional presbyterate, if we do not have discipline in our lives, especially in our use of time, a precious commodity, we must ask ourselves if we are fleeing from the cross. 10 years ago, I entered those doors at the installation ceremony. Outside, there was a sea of demonstrators and media. The ceremony began with a powerful symbol. I was presented with a cross to kiss. I confess, it was a Simon of Cyrenian moment. This is the Church of the Holy Cross. Many of your brothers were ordained here in this church dedicated to the cross. And each year, we return here to celebrate the priesthood of Jesus Christ, to rediscover our identity, to be reminded, as Paul wrote to Timothy, I remind you to stir into flame the gift of God that you have through the imposition of hands. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather of power and love and self-control. So do not be ashamed of your testimony to the Lord, nor of me a prisoner for his sake, but bear your share of hardship for the gospel with the strength that comes from God. Today, we have another chance to fly to the cross and be renewed together with our brother priests. We will pronounce our ordination promises. They are vows of love and fidelity that we make to Christ and to our people. And after stirring into flames the gifts, like the apostles, may we fly back to our people to announce Christ's victory and the joy of the gospel. Amen.